So keeping a coral reef tank can be quite the challenge. Basically, you've got a box of water with a bunch of light on top of it, and you're pouring food and other supplements into it. You're basically making an organic stew, and chances are really good you're going to end up with an algae problem. There's many opinions as to how to resolve algae problems, and some of them work and some of them don't. The three magical ingredients I've always found to a successful reef tank is strong lighting, strong use of calcium, and strong water flow. We have a surge reef tank. Some of you may have seen the original episode. Those of you who haven't will see it again someday when I redo the music. But the point is, we're en route to that tank today. That tank has been running for probably 12, maybe 13 years now. I think we set it up in 95 or 96. And as I mentioned once before, old reef tanks don't die, they just get algae problems. Well, we've drained this tank and we've refilled it a couple of times to start over, and eventually always run into more algae problems. I was here last service, and when I walked in there was a dark growth of olive green algae, and when I stuck my hand into the tank I kind of fanned the rock and all that algae came up. It made me kind of think that maybe part of that tank's problem, even though it has a surge maker, is not enough water flow to free or sweep those debris up off the bottom. So we're going to retrofit it today with a pair of vortex pumps. These are those internal pumps that there's a propeller on the inside and a motor on the outside. We got an interesting deal on them because the 100-gallon reef tank that you saw us set up a while back, that tank came down. I broke it down 2 weeks ago, so it's gone. Some of you can probably find remaining components of that on my used equipment page on the Aquarium Design website. This customer here today picked up those pair of vortex units really dirt cheap. I also sold the computer system and the calcium reactor off that tank last week. But anyhow, we're going to use those vortex units, internal circulation, something to try to increase the flow of water within inside the tank. So why don't you come with us on this service today and see how we install these, and together we'll both learn something. So as I mentioned, there are three magical ingredients in a successful reef tank. 1, strong light. 2, strong use of calcium. And 3, strong water flow. This particular reef tank is 150 gallons. It's called the Surge Reef Tank. It was actually in a national magazine a while back. Mike Pauletta's The Ultimate Marine Aquarium, listed as the Surge Reef Tank. Anyhow, over time, as I mentioned, old reef tanks don't die, they just get algae problems. Well, this particular tank, I feel, could use some stronger water flow, and that's exactly what we're going to do today by adding these vortex units. So I'm not promoting any particular brand one over the other. What I am trying to promote is internal movement of the water within inside the aquarium. These vortex units just happen to have two advantages. One is they retrofit onto the tank easily, meaning I don't have to drill any holes or add any tubing or anything like that. And number two, they offer a very random water flow. In fact, they're programmable to do so. So we're going to learn together how to put these on the tank. So here's the power supplies. This is the power supply for the battery backup. There is a battery backup, so if the power goes out, which often does here in Agora Hills, this will energize those motors and they'll continue to at least move water within inside the tank. So as you can see, it's a 150-gallon tank. There's not a whole large number of corals in the tank, but what ones are in there are all seeming to do well. It's just the problem, if you can see back here, is these little tufts of algae that seem to grow in many different spots. And if I get in there with my hand and wave it around, that algae will just float right up off the rock. So my thinking is there's just not enough water flow in the tank to keep those debris from settling at the bottom of the tank, and in turn creating a fertile little pocket for algae to grow. Now here to kind of prove my point about the lack of water flow, what it does is it allows debris and sediment to settle directly on top of the reef itself. And what ends up happening is you get little fertile little pockets or fertile little valleys, and the algae just in turn flourishes in those particular spots. To prove my point, watch this. As I fan my hand, you'll see the debris just comes rising up like a cloud. It's just not flushing the tank adequately of that debris. There's not enough water movement inside the tank, even though we do have the surge makers.
And in addition to the debris that settles on the live rock, we also strongly believe that the sandbed, the live sandbed, holds on to an abundance of nutrients or debris itself, and that in turn encourages an algae problem. This tank, we siphoned out in small increments the original live sand that had been in there the whole life of the tank about a month or two ago. We've replaced it with regular sand, crushed coral sand, and we're now of the opinion that we're going to vacuum it every time that we service the tank. In addition, we can also siphon some of the debris off the live rock itself and get that directly out of the aquarium.
So that's how we take the old dirty water out of the tank. Let me show you how we put the new clean water back into the tank. Come on.
Welcome to my creation. This is actually an attic area that's above the garage. We've got a tank sitting on a platform and these three unique reservoirs off to the side. The third reservoir is an overflow reservoir, or the one that we can put the new water into and pump it back into the first two reservoirs. This works quite slick. Some might call it a DIY. I call it unique. Uniquely fit the application. Let me explain it to you.
So the water, as it spills over the internal overflow, collects at the bottom. There are two 1.5-inch drain lines that run down to the end of the tank, and these in turn elbow down into two separate reservoirs, unique reservoirs. And this is the protein skimmer, which sits in a tray inside the top of one of those reservoirs, and it receives the water directly from the aquarium, so the protein skimmer gets a chance to work on those organics right away. This system has two pumps in it. One is an Algae pump, the pressure pump, which sends the water back to the tank from the filter system. The other one is a volume pump, also in Algae. This was the original source of internal circulation, but it discharges all the way over here to a refrigeration unit and then has to come up back to the back side of the tank where it's introduced into the system. Just not enough flow inside the tank. Now, this is the tank that has the surge makers on them, the Carlson surge makers, and they do move a lot of water in the tank. But over the course of the years, they might have slowed down a little bit slightly due to restriction to the interior of the lines. But they only discharge about every 30 to 35 seconds, and they only run for about 15. So it really, at one time, obviously was enough, but these days, it doesn't seem to be enough. So This is the reason why I'm trying to increase the circulation of water within the system.
So be sure to come on back for part 2 of LA Fishguys Internal Water Circulation, part 2, as we discuss the reasons for having random or very chaotic water movement within the tank and its benefits. And then we also try to figure out how we're going to install these vortex units.